Hi, I'm Siofra Bradigan, and this is Siofra's Magic Alcove. So today I wanted to talk, at least in brief, about power spots and ley lines. Now originally, when they first came up with the idea of ley lines, or decided that they wanted to make ley lines, what they did was make it an even kind of distribution around the planet. The idea of a ley line is an energy conduit that goes from really a power spot to a power spot, and it's akin to acupuncture meridians, except for the whole planet. And the fact that the planet is alive and it has its own energy body, as it were, makes this a reasonable assumption to make. But in my personal experience with encountering them, most of the time they don't go in straight lines. And of course, just like the body's circulatory system, there are capillaries that are much smaller than your arteries and your veins. It's like different directions, different sizes, and different reasons for existing and that kind of thing. So first off, I've encountered a number of different power spots. One of the things that sets them apart from other spots on the planet is the energy that they put out. And generally when you're approaching a power spot, say you don't know that there's one around, and you're just sort of walking through the woods, and you suddenly start to feel like your legs are very heavy and they don't want to move, and it can feel difficult to breathe. And this is like the outer envelope of the energy field around the power spot. So it's in a way, it's kind of like a natural defense for that place. It keeps mostly the average person away, because if they're sensitive enough to feel that, then usually they feel uncomfortable enough to want to turn around and go in a different direction. So it kind of diverts people around the power spot. But if you know that that's what's happening, then you can walk your way through that resistance envelope. And when you get to the other side of that, all of a sudden everything changes. The thing to remember if you go to a known power spot is that these places amplify whatever you take with you, whatever you have in you. So if you know that you're going to go to a probable power spot, it's best to prepare. Meditate, do some cleansings, clear your own mind out, try to stay focused and centered and grounded as much as possible, so that when you go through that outer envelope into the center of the power spot, what you amplify is that. You amplify your clarity, your groundedness, your centeredness, and that makes it a more pleasant experience to have. If you end up at a power spot that's a public area, this happened to my husband and I. We found a cabin that's a forestry cabin that the Forest Service rents out. And we didn't know that this was a power spot when I rented it. We found out pretty quickly when we arrived, because the energy is kind of intense. And the other thing that the power spots do is they amplify your abilities. So it was a wonderful place for my husband and I in general, because it amplified what we were working on. So I saw lots of visions in the sky. My third eye was extremely active, and many marvelous things. But considering the natural nature of a power spot, it also collected negative stuff from people who had stayed in the cabin. And on occasion, my husband or I would become aware of those extremely negative energies. And so what I did in the moment, trying to figure out how to make it so that we could survive there while we were on our trip. We were there anywhere from 10 days to 2 weeks. I used some of my crystals and my wands, and I would create, I guess what they're now calling crystal grids, but they're not crystal grids the way people look at them now. Like nowadays, crystal grids are this piece of paper or blank thing where you're supposed to put all these same crystals around in a circle, and and then the crystal in the middle, and there's all these lines and whatnot, and people are building them, which I think is great. But when I say crystal grid, I mean like building a machine, like a energetic machine out of the tools and the crystals that I have at hand, and letting the energy move itself around in certain directions. So I used some of my stones and the wands that I had with me and configured them until it created a pattern that felt right and seemed to be clearing out the negative stuff that had been collected by the power spot. And of course, the very next year when we would go back again, we'd have to start that process all over again because it is a public venue. So there's that. The other thing too, I in the late 70s went to a medicine wheel in southern Saskatchewan called Moose Mountain, and it was an incredible experience. There's no doubt about it. I had all kinds of amazing encounters there. And one of the traditions for that particular medicine wheel, and for many of them, is to bring a stone when you walk up to it. If this is a prehistoric site, you'll find these stones, and you'll find like piles of stones in the center, and then other piles around the spokes of the medicine wheel. And so we brought our own stones, like you would in the past if you were going there to meditate, to meet with tribal elders or shaman, medicine men, medicine women, to share experiences and things, whatever the particular medicine wheel was for. Then you would bring a stone with you and you would lay it in the center. In doing a little bit of research recently about that spot, because it came to mind and I was thinking about it, discovered that there are people now who are going to these sacred places and stealing the stones from the cairns. So the cairn that I saw in the 70s, which was probably about 3 feet high, is now only about 1.5 feet high, because people have come up and taken the stones away. Now, probably the impulse to do that is to take some of the power from that spot and take it home with you, and to make it part of your practice, or for some people who are, just lame, as a souvenir. But it's a bad impulse. If you really want to take the power, representation of a power from a power spot, you bring stones with you and then lay them out there and let them absorb the energy, and then you can take your own stones back. But it's never okay to go to a sacred site and then dismantle it. It probably has some serious magical, energetic repercussions that the people who have done this may not even realize is happening to them, because a lot of times people don't put the two things together. Like, they went to this cool place, they took a rock, they brought it home, then they got sick, or their children got sick, or they lost their house, or they lost their job, or whatever potential repercussions there are in the physical real world for destroying something in a magical world. It's like these worlds are connected together. They mirror each other, and the more you get involved in and do magical things and have a magical mindset, the more those kinds of lacks of attention and courtesy and good manners become more problematic and more immediate responses, because the universe responds to this kind of stuff. It's a give and take. And so anyway, so that's a little lecture on etiquette as far as going to power spots go. So when you think about the ancient sites that are around the planet, that, like Stonehenge and the pyramids and, these obvious places, a lot of ancient temples, churches are now built on the same site because there's an energy there. And it's a sacred energy and a connection energy. And people know it, even if they don't know that they know it. And then the ley lines connect these things together. So there's currents of power that go from one spot to another. The problem for people comes in when you live in a house and you have a ley line that's going through your house. Now, these are minor ley lines. I mean, generally speaking, there have been a couple of big ones, sort of a major one on our street that was actually raised up too high and was going through one of the houses across from us, and you can redirect those kinds of things. And in my paranormal investigations that I do, finding out if there is a ley line going through an area is definitely one of the things I look for. And the way I find which way the energy is going is I sort of use myself like I guess it's sort of like a water witching rods. I become the rod, as it were. And I stand in the spot where I can feel the energy and close my eyes, and the energy will actually move my body in a specific direction. And sometimes strong enough it'll almost knock me off my feet, so I have to be kind of aware and alert when I do that so I don't fall down, which is bad. Don't want to fall down. So when I go into one of those places and I find the directionality of that particular ley line, which was probably a tributary, capillary, kind of thing, a small coming off of another piece of energy that's just going through the area. People aren't supposed to live on top of these things. It's not good for you, not good for your health, not good for your mental health. It amplifies, like I said. A ley line will amplify not as much as a power spot, but it still will amplify what's going on. So if you're potentially psychic or clairvoyant or hear voices, spirits, then this kind of stuff is likely to happen to you more, and it'll amp you up, and that can also attract spirit activity, because then you're amped up and they can see you better, and then they're going to be attracted to it, and then things kind of roll along like a ball and downhill. So if you come across something like this and you're able to tell that it's there and you can feel the energy in which direction it's traveling, what I do is I actually reroute that ley line underneath the house where people are staying. So I kind of build them an island of neutral energy, so they're just sitting on the ground instead of sitting in the middle of a stream running through their living room, for example, or through their kitchen or wherever. And the way we do that is I put a grounding stone like black tourmaline, obsidian, petrified wood. These are stones that work really well to do this, and you put it on the outside of the house. So you've got your structure here, your ley line is going through this way. You go on the outside of the house and you place the grounding stone to divert the energy underneath into the ground, and so it's heading down in this direction. Then you have to go to the opposite side of the house, the direction the energy was flowing, and then you place a different kind of stone there to pull the energy back up to the surface so it can continue on its way, because they're supposed to be here. It's not like there's something wrong with them existing. It's just not healthy for people to be sitting in the middle of them all the time. And so the stone I generally use for pulling the energy back up is a piece of jade of some kind, jade or jadeite, and placing the stone on that side allows the energy to keep coming. Now, funny, you really have to be careful when you actually place that pulling it up stone, because however long it takes you to get from that side of the house to the other side of the house, so it helps if you have two people doing this, it's not as intense, that energy is going down and sort of building up like a backwash. And so it's like building up energy, and then when you pull it back up, it all comes up at once as it heads on its way and goes in its merry direction. The one that was here on our street that for some reason had risen up instead of stayed down in the ground, I went to the end of the street. The street here is like curves up like this kind of thing, but then the road is down like this. So the ley line should have been following along the surface. They had built it up, and somehow it like been pulled up in that direction and was in the middle of this house. So I went to the bottom of the street where I figured, okay, this would be the place for it to come out, and I placed I placed the stone right there, and when it came and it hit me, it knocked me backwards and to the street. So that was fun. Yeah, so you learn things. You find out what works and what doesn't work. So that's something to be aware of. And then there are land guardians that have a sort of a similar feel but different. And a lot of times when I get calls where people think there's some like evil presence like up the hill, it's foreboding, and as night falls it gets stronger, and they're like freaking out. And generally speaking, when I hear that, it turns out to be a land guardian. And people have a similar reaction to the guardians as they do the power spots. It's this energetic kind of disharmony, discontent, anxiousness that comes up. But with them, it's pretty simple to take care of. Generally, our area has got a lot of those, still fairly active from the Native American population that lived here. And I think probably it's generally true across the United States. I'm not sure about other countries since I don't live there and I haven't encountered them that way. But they're sort of the spirit of an area or spirit of a neighborhood, or it's their job to kind of take stock and be in charge of what happens around them. You know, they are the ones that warn the animals when a storm is coming, or protect the people if the people are under their protection. And generally what you do for them is acknowledge them and give them an offering. And for me, I usually use Apache tier for the acknowledgement offering part, and then depending on whose property is on, if there's someone who uses tobacco, then we use tobacco, which is a pretty standard offering in a lot of the native cultures in the area, or sage from my own garden, because that's something that's you know, I have harvested myself and grown myself, and it has more meaning to the spirit world. They can tell, they really can. But intent is certainly important, and so being respectful and honoring their presence, acknowledging their existence, and appreciating what they do goes a long way to stop the foreboding. The foreboding is more of a anxious energy that happens between them and like normal people who are unaware of the fact that they exist, and sometimes that kind of rankles. It sort of like rubs their fur the wrong way. They don't like it. But anyway, there's so many things that are out there and so many ways to encounter this kind of stuff. Like I said, this is just going to be a general overview. I'm going to do further videos on some of my actual encounters with, like, helping a ley line that was plugged and why, or going to the medicine wheel in southern Saskatchewan and what happened to me there. But, you know, encountering the unusual and the strange becomes more commonplace the farther along the path that you go, because you are tuning yourself, you're tuning your brain, you're tuning your body and its energy, you're tuning your senses to be more open to detect this kind of thing. And as you gain more and more experience, then you get more and more information, and it becomes more and more real, and it sort of feeds itself in that way. So, anyway, this has been Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan, so blessed be.